Please allow me to introduce Dr. Jack. He is an assistant professor of law at the School of Law, SMU. He graduated from NUS in '95 and practiced for about 6 years as a litigation lawyer before completing an LLM at University College London in 2003 on a British Gazetting scholarship. In 2012, he was conferred a PhD for research into the interpretation of Bills of Rights by the University of Birmingham. He joined SMU in 2008 and teaches research, constitutional and admin law. He also has an interest in the law of cultural property and heritage. He was a 2009 Lee Foundation Fellow for Research Excellence and won the School of Law's Most Promising Teacher Award for 2010-2011. He is a member of the Law Society of Singapore's Public and International Law Committee.
Good afternoon and thanks for coming. I've been asked today to speak about the limits of freedom of speech in the Constitution, but I thought I would go a bit wider since I'm the first speaker and sort of set some of the discussion about some of the issues that may arise if you are a blogger and interested in this. If you publish a statement which makes someone else think less of the person that you're talking about, then that could be defamatory. So, another example, Wendy Cheng, I think we all know her as Xia Xue. So she posted disparaging remarks about Donya, whom I referred to just now, containing some entertainment contracts and endorsement deals that she had entered into and said, I don't like to be compared with Yang. Then next thing you know, in July 2008, Yang has got a lawyer to send her a letter of demand saying, you have defamed me and I want an apology, otherwise I'm going to sue. So then Xia Xue had to delete the offending blog entry, but by that time, of course, when you put something on the internet, it's very hard to withdraw it. People had already copied it, forwarded it to other people, taken screenshots of it, reposted it elsewhere, so it's very, very hard to control. And Xia Xue then said, I'm not going to apologize, sue me if you want to, but it seems that nothing came out of it, because I don't think we really heard more about anything. But it just shows that people can get very upset with things that you say about them on websites, so you could put yourself at risk. What if I post something and don't put my name there? Surely that's safe, right? Then you can't trace it back to me. Well, it is troublesome, but if a person is determined enough, they can actually issue legal proceedings against the ISP, like Singtel or Sahab or something like that, and say, I want the identity to be revealed. I want to know whose account it came from, and so on. So if they are willing to do so, the ISP will most likely say, okay, right, I got a court order against me, I'm going to reveal who it is. So it will not be so easy to get away with it if the person is determined. Of course, many people may just say, it's too much trouble, I'm not going to bother. But if you really upset them, who knows? So the advice is, of course, do not make disparaging remarks about identifiable people on your blog. And you can also be reliable for republishing a defamatory statement made by someone else. So it's not a defense to say, XYZ said that this person is a real idiot, blah, 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 because then you can be liable for having republished what XYZ's defamatory statement was there. So therefore, if people are allowed to leave comments on your blog, you actually probably do have to look through these comments from time to time and delete anything that's potentially defamatory, because otherwise they will find you liable for having republished the comment.
Afternoon. What I'm going to speak about is law of defamation. I'm going to share with you some of ideas which I've gotten from the case which I handled, and this is the case of Dow Jones publication, Far Eastern Economic Review, sued by LKY and PM. My presentation will be done against the backlog or backdrop of other perils or pitfalls when you deal with the issue of free speech. I will not cover content, for example, so I'll just only focus on defamation law. But nonetheless, it is within that backdrop. Okay. Now, why I chose this case is this. I think as of now, it contains the most authoritative statement on law on defamation as it relates to media. After the case of was decided, I don't remember any other, it was decided by Court of Appeal. It was, I don't think that I come from any other judge who has expressed any views about one of the defenses raised in this case. And in that sense, it is important. Now, this case, I think I handled it from between 2007 to 2009, and I think maybe 2010. And the backdrop to this case is this. Number one, there's a history of political defamation suits, and number two, there's a history of crippling damages awarded against defendants. And you see that I just choose one example, okay, one personality, and you can see that Mr. Lee has sued in a period of 40 years, starting from 1965. That was 2 years after free speech was embedded in our constitution. From 1965 to I think present, there have been at least 20 over lawsuits involving Mr. Lee, especially Mr. Lee. Okay. 20 lawsuits, and I never lost any. 20 lawsuits, and half of them concerns political opponents. The other half concerns foreign publications, whether it's Fear, Bloomberg, Economist, IHT. Yeah. So that is a backdrop to this lawsuit. Other backdrop is this. Crippling damages awarded against defendants. This is the one extraordinary example. A former client of mine also. And I think you all know him, right? Tsen-Ta, right? And he was sued by, I think, half the cabinet. And then he was MMLKY, PM Goh Chok Tong, DPMs Lee Hsien Loong, Tony Tan, and then ministers Lee Yock Suan, Teo Chee Hean, and I think three then current MPs and 3 then retired MPs. So this was a backdrop when the case came up.
I wanted the points of my talk to not paralyze you with fear. I think after listening to what you can't do and what the repercussions of overstepping those boundaries are, you might get the sense that there are a lot of things you really shouldn't be saying, especially when it comes to the law, critiquing the law, which is something that I'm very interested in. So in the next few slides, what I'm going to try and help you do is get a sense of what does and does not constitute contempt by looking at some specific statements and specific examples. And we're going to engage in a bit of audience participation here. I'm going to give you the statements and I'm going to give you the graphics, and you're going to tell me whether or not you think it constitutes contempt. This is the first picture. Jack has kind of given the game away, because if you were paying attention to his talk, in his speech he mentioned the kangaroo court case. Do you think this constitutes contempt? Raise your hands if you do. Contempt? No, I'm not asking you whether you think it should constitute contempt. I'm asking you whether you think that the Singaporean courts would view this as contempt. Do you think it does? Yes, okay.
Oh, those are wallabies. Those are not
We'll get to that. Okay. Is this statement contempt? Okay. In case you're wondering who the large Indian man is, that's Mr. Darshan Singh. He's the former hangman of Singapore. Long record of public service. And in Alan's book, named actually for Darshan, because as you can see, Darshan's a jolly hangman, and Alan's book was called Once a Jolly Hangman. Alan says this: the implementation of capital punishment is highly discriminatory. According to Amnesty International, the death sentence is more likely to be imposed in Singapore on those who are poorer and less educated, making them more vulnerable than average. So again, a show of hands. do you think the courts view this as contempt? Is this contempt? Show of hands if you think it does constitute contempt.
Because is there evidence to say otherwise?
Okay, wait, we'll get to that. Okay. So, this is the third statement. Do you think that this could constitute contempt? Alex Au's recent commentary on the Waffle School case, where he says it's not going to disabuse anyone of his belief that the law is not blind and that the police, the prosecutors and judges are indulgent towards the well-connected. Frankly, even if the authorities can explain all the details, it may achieve nothing either, for the belief didn't spring from just this case alone. Do you think this would be viewed by the authorities as contempt? Do you think this could constitute contempt? Show of hands. Less people. Fair enough. So the answer to the first point is okay. The kangaroo shirts, yes, clearly constitutes contempt, because it refers to the Singapore justice system in general. In particular, the context in which this occurred was an assessment of damages in a defamation case by certain ministers against the Singapore Democratic Party. And Justice Judith Prakash agrees with those of you who raised your hands. She says, well, the courts view it as contempt. Notwithstanding the fact that, as you can see, this picture is a picture of a wallaby. And it seems as if one of the arguments the second respondent raised was, I'm not calling you a kangaroo court because the animal on my shirt is a wallaby. Yeah. So, Justice Prakash wasn't very impressed with this. And she says, well, I don't find that very satisfactory. It looks like a kangaroo to me. For the zoologically inclined, you would know that they belong to the same family, the marsupials.
Well, like Chen-Si, I think that there's a fine balance to be struck between trying to educate Singaporeans and give them fair warning about how difficult the terrain can be if you operate as a blogger, and scaring all of them to death, such that everyone decides that, well, maybe we shouldn't blog after all, right? Or just do it anonymously. That would really be against, I think, the spirit of what I'm sure this forum is supposed to be about, which I think is supposed to, at the end of the day, I think, encourage Singaporeans to say what they mean and say what they feel, and enlarge our political discourse in Singapore. So I'm going to focus today, unlike the previous three speakers, on how to manage political risks as opposed to legal risks. Yeah? My aim is simple. It is to try to describe political terrain that commentators confront, so that you can navigate that terrain more knowledgeably. Right? It is not intended to tell you what path to take or whether or not to take certain risks, because that in the end depends on what we want to achieve. But I think it would be the situation we want to avoid, whether I think in the legal sphere or the political sphere, is to get into some kind of trouble that we didn't foresee and weren't prepared for. Yeah? So the aim, I hope that this workshop can achieve, is that we know what the obstacles are, right? We know what the limitations of freedom are, and then we can make up our own minds about whether to enter that terrain or not. So it is about creating the knowledge about the terrain rather than trying to advise you as a consultant, how you should think. Right? So what we have heard so far is the stuff that can be said within the law and the stuff that will fall outside of the law that might get you into legal trouble. What I want to go on now to try to explain is, even if you stay within the law, right, there are of course a different set of risks that you might confront. But to be complete, in this graphic, let me start right at the center. Of course, there is such a thing as pro-establishment speech. So if there are people here from what is that group, fabrications about the PAP and so on, right? So that would be right at the center then. Peptir and so on, right at the center. But Straits Times. Well, Straits Times. if you want to go out of pro-establishment, stay within the law, then there's actually quite a wide range of approaches that you can take. And that's where the discussion won't be complete without including this thing called Obi markers. Yeah? So if you look at this, you try to understand the logic behind this sort of Venn diagram. It is possible to be legal, to act legally, but outside of Obi markers. Or it's also possible to be legal and critical within Obi markers. Then of course it's possible to be not critical and legal, which puts you squarely in the So broadly speaking, this is the terrain that we want to explore. By the way, if there are individuals who believe in things like civil disobedience and so on, Gopal Nair, Chuan, in a past life, I guess, right? That will take you outside, right? Deliberate breaking of the law as a campaign of civil disobedience. So really there are 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 different strategies you can take. Non-legal, legal outside Obi markers, legal within Obi markers, and pro-establishment. And like I said, I'm not telling you where to put yourself, but I'm saying that assuming you want to, assuming that this group, if I'm not mistaken, would want to be in the critical camp rather than the pro-establishment camp, then I think the key thing that we want to look at is this thing called Obi markers. So let's take a closer look. Right? What is this boundary all about? First of all, what are Obi markers? I define Obi markers as lines of political acceptability. Yeah? The law in Singapore, of course, is already tough enough to deal with. Obi markers, in a sense, are actually tougher. Right? The reason why they're tougher is because they're not written down anymore. Yeah? Whereas with the law, you can actually go to statutes.agc.gov.sg and read all about the laws in there, all in black and white. Of course, the way they apply may be tricky, but at least they're written down somewhere, right? OB markers are not written down. They are also highly contextual, and they move. Things that are outside of OB markers in the past. Say for example, to give you a concrete example, when I was a journalist at Straits Times, it was well outside the OB markers to even acknowledge that there was a gay culture in Singapore. Right? Whereas now it's not outside the OB markers to talk about sexual politics. Yeah? So that's a simple example of how OB markers shift, usually in a more progressive direction, fortunately.
Yes.
Yeah, but not always.
My name is Francis Pang. I'm a retired person. It's wonderful to have 3 lawyers here because these are questions that have been at the back of our mind for such a long time. And you say that if we blog, we work within the law, but sometimes the interpretation is so nebulous in some ways. You know? So that's one. More recently, and these were judgments, one by Philip Pillay and one by, I think both by Philip Pillay. The recent case about the Hougang case, right? Where the Prime Minister unfettered and he says that it is not by election, but by, the rule is that, just one word, by any election. So it's okay by election, that means he has right, but if the word were by any election, then. So again, the spirit of the law clearly is that when you have a by-election, it must be held, right? If the seat is vacant, you must have it, right? But the interpretation is so nebulous. And of course, the third one is Ken Jayaranam's case about lending money to, having Parliament approve a loan. And the judgment was that a loan doesn't need to be approved, only borrowing needs to be approved. But as any layman thinks, come on, you're risking the country's reserves, it must be approved by Parliament. So my question, I'm not a lawyer, so that's why I'm asking this question, because as a layman, I really cannot understand how these interpretations can be made. And it flows to what we are saying. If you are a blogger and you think the law is interpreted in some way by your own layman's interpretation, probably you're wrong, because the judge can be interpreted any way they like, it seems. So can I have the lawyer's opinion?
The decision concerning whether or not it was an offence for politicians to remain in a polling station during the time of the polling was not a court case. It was actually, I think the government asked the Attorney General for a legal opinion as to whether it was lawful or not. And at that time, the AG was the recently retired Chief Justice Tsen-Ta. And if I recall, his opinion was that it was not an offence. I'd say this was probably based on a fairly technical reading of the section. The section said it was an offence to remain in the vicinity of a polling station. I can't remember whether vicinity was the word used, but something of that nature. But it said nothing about whether it was an offence to be in the polling station. So he said, well, on a reading of it, technically speaking, if you are in the polling station, it's not an offence. You can be in the vicinity of it, you know. But I would say that that is a very, very technical interpretation of it. I do not know whether it's actually been amended by now. Offhand, I can't recall whether it's actually been amended. But I would say that is difficult to justify, especially in order to get into the polling station, as you point out, you have to pass in the vicinity of it. So technically, they could have committed an offence. I would say that, but and that was quite technical. As for the Hougang by-election interpretation, it's on appeal, so I think it's on appeal, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see what the Court of Appeal says about it. Again, it is based on a particular reading of that particular provision in the Constitution, and what the judge said was that he compared it with a 1955 order of council, which was in force when Singapore was still a colony of the United Kingdom, where there were provisions in the Constitution at that time. One which said that, I don't know whether you have to cast your mind back, but we used to have a day when there was no parliament, but we had a legislative assembly. And at that time, the legislative assembly was made up of elected and unelected people. So there was a provision saying that if there's any vacancy that arises in a seat that is unelected, i.e. appointed by the governor, then it shall be filled by appointment. And then the elected seats shall be filled by election. So he said that, obviously, that was the predecessor of the current provision that we have, and it shows that it was intending to point out the manner in which you fill the seat, not the fact that you actually have to fill it. But of course what happened was that we did away with appointed seats entirely, so that provision disappeared and we were left with shall be filled by election. But he said that since that was the intention at the time in 1955, it did not change when carried into the current constitution. I personally, I have read the judgment, and I'm thinking whether or not the judge should have made such a clear distinction between it's either the mode or the fact of holding the election, and could it not have been both? As in, it explained that the provision requires both that it be held by way of an election and that an election should be held. So I don't know whether the Court of Appeal will, how it will rule on the matter, and I'll be very interested to see what happens. As for the Article 144 case, this is the provision which says that no loan that is given or guarantee that is taken by the government may be done without permission of Parliament, and I think the concurrence of the President. This case again, actually, looking at the reasoning of the judge, I would say that I actually agree with it, because he went into the legislative history of that provision, and it seems that from all the parliamentary debates, it was never contemplated the way Mr. Jeranam contemplated it. Perhaps it should have been, but it wasn't. So I think it's actually quite justifiable based on what was the intention of Parliament at that time. Of course, this doesn't change the fact that if it is thought that more protection is required, perhaps there needs to be a change in the wording. But I'm sort of less skeptical that the court read it wrongly, just because there is he referred to quite a lot of white papers and debates in Parliament, and at no stage did anyone say that if a loan is to be given, we should have concurrence. It was always about taking of loans and so on. So, but you can see that, I suppose you can say that similar safeguards should be extended to that kind of situation.
But the broader question is, this is the sense that, it's the spirit of the law, come on. And isn't the law made to reflect what the spirit, what
May I request that not to interrupt the speakers are speaking.
Sorry.
So.
But it's okay, let me see finish speaking. I would say this is the thing is that the court is supposed to, how shall I answer this? Well, we work under what we call representative democracy, which means that you elect leaders to then decide best what is for you. And if they have decided that that is the only provision that's required, in a sense, what is required is a change in the law, not so much that the court should somehow miraculously come up with a new interpretation of it that departs very differently from what was intended by Parliament. This is, I suppose, the issue. That's how I would say. You know, if there is a weakness, then we should look to reforming that provision.
Yes, Donaldson.
Hello, I want to ask about copyright. I hope that the lawyers here can elaborate on fair use, because there are certain issues, like for example, Straits Times regularly reproduce photos from Facebook against without permission. So we want to seek lawyers' opinion on whether that is actually legal or illegal, whether people should even, whether newspapers should ever print photos of people without permission. And also, I also have another question with regards to, hello? Okay, and another question is also on ownership of images. Because what I understand was there was I think it was a court case in America regarding ownership of images. Because, for example, when a celebrity or a model walks along in a public space and someone takes photo, it appears that his or her modeling agency can sue the photographer if the photographer actually published the image online. So this is again another issue that's related to that. Thanks.
Fair use by newspapers. Newspapers have a special privilege under the Copyright Act. There is a fair use for the purpose of reporting news. So I think that's what Straits Times relies on. All you have to do is acknowledge where the source was. So once you say, this one from where, then they can rely on fair use for that. So the question is whether or not it expands to any, because it says for the purpose of reporting news, so it doesn't say who reports the news. So whether bloggers can rely on that, I have no idea. We have no cases brought to the court yet.
But there's a US case.
Yeah, but we're not in the US. But as to your second question about if, say, you happen to photograph a model that's walking down the street, I don't think the position in Singapore is the same as that in the US. Basically, there is no right of privacy in Singapore under the common law. So you can't actually sue someone for saying you have breached my privacy in that kind of setting. There may be other situations where you pass confidential information to someone and then that is released. That's a different matter. But if you're not doing anything confidential, you're walking down the street and someone takes a picture of you, then the person who takes the picture owns the copyright. And the person who happens to be featured in the picture cannot say that that is a breach of any copyright or anything of that sort. That I believe is the position in Singapore right now.
I don't know about case laws and so on. I can only make a general remark that I think in general, actually court cases are a great boon to journalists because everything that appears in court, of course, is, what's the term, comes under absolute privilege, right? So even if, is that right, is right term?
Just absolute, I think it's qualified.
It isn't qualified? I thought anything that's reported in court can then be reported by the press. Yeah, in that sense it is, right? So even if, for example, defamatory statements are made in court, as long as it's in open court, it can be reported by the press. So it's a gold mine. So in fact, I remember covering where the High Court case involving Chee Soon Juan, sorry, it was SDP versus Chiam See Tong, right? It involved Chee Soon Juan as well. Peter, you were representing Chiam, or the other side, kind of SDP at the point. And it was wonderful because all this fantastic infighting in the then SDP and so on, all could be covered openly. I remember writing on and on about it. The trading insults, accusations, and so on, which normally couldn't be covered because most of that, if you report, openly sells up to libel suit. Yeah. So I would be surprised if, and that, by the way, is one reason why the papers are going to town with the current CPIB case. Some people feel, oh, this is too much. What's the Straits Times trying to do? It's because the gold mine, the things that are being said there, that then the press can report that whereas if it was just picked up through interviews, the press could not report such things. It would be regarded as just allegations. And so why was it that in specific cases the press ignores it? It could be any number of reasons. The press produces a new product every day, 365, 363 days a year, with thousands of words, hundreds of stories every day. So we've got a higher R&D cycle than Apple computer. Remember that? iPhone, comes out with 2 products a year or whatever, big song and dance. Newspapers produce a new product every single day. Yeah? It's going to get a whole lot of things wrong every single day for a whole lot of reasons, ranging from reporter lazy, right? Could be that. Or reporter hardworking, but editor too lazy to figure out what the hell is going on. It could be because editor on that particular day talking to the right reporter, not interested in that case, more interested in Manchester United topping the EPL, right? Or a judgment call that this one maybe readers not. We are interested, but we think readers not so interested. Are too technical. Who knows what is half glass, half full is? Who knows, right? Very complicated. I understand as a very smart editor, but I don't think my readers are interested. My readers more interested in Cecilia Su. Okay? So don't ask me to speculate why a particular story was not covered. Yeah? A range of possible reasons why something is not covered or undercovered and so on. All I can say is the good thing now, and the situation we should be aiming for is not a perfect newspaper or a perfect blog or whatever. We should be aiming for a situation where at least if some news media foul up, there are other media to pick up the pieces. And we're kind of heading in that direction. So we are less vulnerable to the mistakes of any one medium. Right? So that if say today's screws up, never mind, maybe newspaper will catch it. If Straits Times drops the ball, maybe Mediacorp will catch it. If all of them drop the ball, let's hope TOC catches it. Right? Or the SDP website or whatever. Right? So and that to me is the only hope. Let's hope that there's an improvement.
Hi, I'm Tara from Marua. I just wanted to quickly ask a question more from a political observer's point of view, because very lately I think there's been a lot of online activity, and particularly there was a rather infamous blogger who was posted by that explicit photos of himself, and I think that clearly operates outside the law, but yet it's seen as a domestic school disciplinary problem. So I'm just wondering, from an observation point of view, where do you see when do they want to act on a particular matter, and when do you wish not to? So I think it's maybe even beyond the OB markers, but more in terms of like I don't even think it's prosecutorial discretion in this sense, where there's no charges even brought against individual.
Clara, I'm not sure this is a direct answer to your question, but you're referring to the NUS guy, or maybe former NUS guy. Was that right? And his sensational video. Was that the one?
But in general, is there a lighter touch or a hands-off approach?
As in why he's not been prosecuted yet?
Just in general online activities. Like, is there a lighter approach to what is happening online, or a more hands-off approach?
And that would be an example of what? The Alvin case would be an example of a lighter touch because he hasn't been stoned.
Yeah.
Stoned. Yeah, no, I would not only be in favor of a lighter touch, I would also be, I think the real problem that we see here in this case, and a string of cases that we have happening almost every month, is actually very petty cases becoming national issues so quickly, right? Whether it's xenophobia or this or that or the other. I was chatting with a friend in Hong Kong recently, and he was talking about the xenophobia cases in Hong Kong, which are quite serious, right? But he's saying that this goes on constantly underground, but are rarely are they elevated to the national stage so that everybody's talking about it. It's just taken for granted. Yeah, there's a lot of disgusting stuff that's happening in any society. In Singapore, I get the impression, the ways so many of these cases get blown up from a little squabble between two people, or some stupid act, or maybe creative arts act by a NUS law student, right? And it becomes a national issue. How does it become a national issue so fast? I think that is something we need to think about, right, as a society. Does it suggest that we are also provincial and small-minded, that even basically kampung gossip, this should be relegated to the level of kampung gossip, as in, you hear, hey, interesting thing happened at NUS, this guy did that. That's about it. Why does it have to consume the attention of our most influential bloggers, our national newspaper, our politicians, and nothing better to worry about? I think the problem is that we haven't woken up to the fact that we are no longer a kampong. You know, we are a city of 5 million people. It's a diverse, complex city. And of course, in a cosmopolitan city like this, a lot of weird stuff happens. Let's take it for granted. A lot of crazy things are said on the ground. Racist remarks are made. People post, have sex on video, etc. I mean, come on, what do you expect? This is a city of 5 million people. Of course there must be people having sex on video. And of course some of that is online. It would be weird. The news would be if it doesn't happen. The question is, has OB markers increased or decreased since the last GE? That was a question from the back earlier. My sense is that the OB markers, not as a conscious position of the government, but simply because of pressure from the ground, have been pulled back quite a bit. That things that were considered politically unacceptable to say just 2 years ago are now quite commonly said, even in public. And of course, this is one of the ways in which OB markers can be pushed back. OB markers work when it's only a small number of identifiable individuals who are pushing at the margins, because then they become easy targets. But if everyone is doing it, then that becomes the new political culture, and therefore, by definition, the OB marker gets pushed back.
My name is Leslie, and I'm a student reporter from NDIS's Blooming. And one of my questions will be, do you think that the last general election was one of the factors that led to the increasing blurring OB markers? Okay,
My name is Shaq. Last year, there was a spate of racially seditious posts on people's personal profiles on social networking sites. Do you think that these posts are simply reflective of personal opinions or majorly detrimental to society?
My name is Sarika, and the last question is, there are lawyers on this panel today, and what can those without legal knowledge do to educate their peers on their perils of the online world? Thank you.
I think three of the comments or questions that were made were kind of related. One was, of course, the Alvin Tan or the Go, the NUS sex blogger. Oh dear. Then the other one was about whether more should be done about catching mischievous persons who post on the internet. The last one was about whether racially sensitive remarks on social media is a symptom of like a wider problem. Well, I mean, I can't really tell. I'm taking the last question first. I can't really tell whether it is a new wider problem. I think it may just be attributable to the fact that it's so easy now to make what would in the past be a private comment that you share with your friends suddenly viewable by so many people. And sometimes, so it could be that unfortunately this has always been around, that there's been some kind of latent racism or prejudice views about people. It's just that you never got to hear about it until social media came about, and then next thing you know, a brief comment that you write on Facebook, boom, 100,000 people can see it. So it could be that just the medium has made it so much easier it is to inadvertently or otherwise make these points of view known. What should be done about it? Well, as I said just now in my presentation, I think that to some extent people should grow thicker skin, and I agree very much with what Sharon has said. Sometimes these things are so minor that when it becomes blown up, it just really is making a complete mountain out of a molehill sometimes, and that then say the law must come down, they must be charged or something, it really, I think, becomes very excessive. And I'd say that this is where, why is it some cases become court cases and some don't? It's a matter of prosecutorial discretion. Sometimes it's seen that this is a statement that we really cannot let people get away with. And so there have been some high-profile cases, especially where the person who's making the statement has some degree of prominence, a religious leader of some sort, or its statement is so inflammatory that they feel something must be done, and then that's when action is taken. Other times it could be that it was a throwaway remark that the person really didn't realize what effect it would have and all that. And then they take the option of instead maybe issuing a warning, or sometimes just a statement saying we disagree with it. That step has been taken in the past before as well. So I think that we do, in a sense, have to have some degree of flexibility here. You cannot expect that the government must make every single case a court case. I think think that would be very bad. I mean, technically, a lot of these things, I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose they would be offences if you really want to charge the person, right? Putting pornographic material online technically is an offence under the Films Act, the Penal Code. Yeah, but in the end of the day, it is a young chap who, against other people's better judgment, he went and did this thing. You know, do you really want to stick him with a criminal record for the rest of his life at the age of 22? So again, I think some flexibility, some discretion has to be used here.
Thank you, speakers. We won't be taking any more questions. But please do feel free to stay back, engage with the speakers if they have time to engage with you. That is, we have some tokens of appreciation for the speakers, and Jeanette will present it to the speakers. Thank you all for coming. We hope it has been a fruitful afternoon for you. Please do stay back and mingle around and get some questions.